All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining into Scar Stories. I'm Nicole Golden, the host, and we're going to dive right in this morning because I have one of my most favorite people, and I feel fangirlish slash stalkerish slash everything. So this
Never
is.
give up.
I know. Don't encourage it, Brandi. Don't make it worse. But this is Brandi Wilson, and we're going to talk about her ministry at the end, leading and loving it. But just quick background, I got connected with her and Lori Wilhite probably about 8 or 9 years ago when Bryant and I first got started in the ministry. I was super young, walking through all my mental health stuff, just feeling so alone, and stumbled across these two pastors' wives that were ministering to women in leadership. And so I've been following Brandi since then. So I know probably more about her than she would want. And I can tell you all sorts of things. She has 3 boys. And my first question for you, Brandi, is will my bathrooms, because I have 3 boys, so
Yes,
will my bathrooms ever stop smelling like urine?
never, 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 never. It's so funny. In the house we live in now, we have three bathrooms. So my oldest is upstairs. He's away at college right now, but he's upstairs. So he kind of has his own space. And then
Yeah.
my middle and youngest share what should be the guest bathroom. But I'm going to be honest, it has turned in the guest bathroom now. When I have people over, they use my bathroom because I
Yeah.
trust it to be seen by outsiders, where
I know.
theirs cannot be trusted. And it's just their definition of clean and our definition of clean are very different
So
things.
different. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, and we're still at the so I my oldest daughter is 8, and then I've got a 6, 4, and 1-year old. So my
Oh,
6 and 4-year-old, they're completely potty trained, but they're not completely aim trained, if you know
they
what I'm
never
saying.
will be. They never will
Great.
be.
Great. I'm so happy about that. I literally like my husband can't even walk in the bathroom without gagging. And I'm
No,
like, I bleach this thing 2 or 3 times a week. I don't know why I try anymore. I'll
right.
probably give up, but I don't know. Anyways, all right.
Yeah.
Now that we got the most important question out of the way,
All the
um,
dirty laundry's out, all the dirty laundry.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So just so everyone knows who's listening, like always, I send my questions ahead of time. And then Brandi and I have gone back and forth about what's okay to ask, what's not okay to ask. And I always want to start the podcast so everyone knows like Brandi has every right to not ask a question or not answer a question or scooch past one because this is her story and we want to honor it. But Brandi, would you tell us you were married and pastored a church with your now ex-husband for a number of years? Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how long you were married and how long you guys were at that church in Tennessee?
Yes. I married my college sweetheart back in 1996. And fresh out of college, we actually, right before we were married, we planted a church outside of Bowling Green, Kentucky, called in a small town there. And we actually loved that. We were there for 5 years. After those 5 years, we moved to Nashville,
Mm,
um, which Nashville was always a city I loved. I had an aunt who lived here. I grew up visiting Opryland, all of that kind of stuff. So Nashville was familiar, and I was excited to be here. Took a job at a church that was existing. We were there for about a year before we planted Crosspoint Church, which is still in existence here. It's a great church that I'm really blessed and lucky to still be in contact with church and
mm,
church staff and have a great relationship there.
love
And
that.
we were there 14 years in senior leadership before my husband at the time chose to leave. He walked away from the church and he walked away from our marriage and walked away from
Mm,
our family unit. And it was like everything I knew came crashing down
yeah.
overnight. And because the church was large and well known in the city, it was something that was public and people were aware of. And I think we all know that when things come crashing down
Hmm.
in public, it's been crashing down behind the scenes for a really long time.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized how much it was crashing behind the scenes.
I
There
was
were
going to ask you that. Like, were you prepared for this or was this just kind of out of nowhere for you?
We had definitely been experiencing, we had, our normal bumps in marriage like people do, and had been in marriage counseling a few times to work
Yeah.
on those, which I would still recommend for people. I'm a big proponent of counseling, healthy Christian counseling. Um, but as far as how much was going on behind the scenes at that level. I did not know.
Yeah.
Um, I was at the church a lot. I was super involved. I loved the staff. I was at every staff meeting. But there was quite a bit of things that unfolded, years after I found. It was shocking. I'd been
Mm,
divorced a couple of years, and I would see someone and they'd tell me something and I would be like, I have
wow.
no clue. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't think I knew how much. I think it's very difficult when you're in a
Mm,
position where your husband is on a platform and he is loved by everyone. And
mhm.
for me, I was told, he's amazing, he's incredible, he saved our marriage, he changed my life, he led me to Christ. And when you're hearing all of those
Yeah.
messages repeatedly for years and years, and then
Yeah.
the church is growing and all of that, you start to think, well, I must be the problem. I
Yeah.
mean, if everybody is telling me that, this situation is so amazing, and I agree, church was amazing. I loved the life change that was happening. I loved the impact it had in the Nashville, Middle Tennessee community. But at the same time, there was just something that didn't feel right. And
Mm,
I did for a long time think that I was the weak link,
mm.
Nicole. So yeah.
Yeah. Bless your heart. Um, so I guess when all of this is happening, like you said, it was public and you said like, in Tennessee, but it's funny because my husband and I had been following his ministry for a while. And in fact, what is wild about this is right before all of this kind of hit the fan, my husband had been at a conference, I can't remember what one, and had met him personally.
Mhm.
And so for us, yeah, on the outside, it's like, oh, I can't imagine. So how did you process all this I mean, because yeah, everyone's watching you, everyone's waiting for a statement, everyone wants to know what happened. And, then all the gossip starts and whose fault was it? And, was it Brandy's or, so how did you process all of that? How did you mourn and work through all of that privately while it's all happening publicly?
Yeah, it was terribly difficult.
I can imagine.
The unraveling of your family is a really traumatic thing to live through.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a starting over process.
Mm,
I went from, being surrounded by thousands of people to shrinking my circle to about 3 people. And on a regular basis, I talk to my friend Lori Wilhite, best
yeah.
friend who you mentioned earlier. I saw my therapist
Mhm.
regularly, who I'm still with and love and adore. And I talked to, I had another friend here in Nashville who's about 10 years older than me.
Okay.
And she and her husband were great to me. They are both on their second marriage and have a blended
Mhm.
family. So she'd been through the process of a divorce. My family was very close to her family.
Yeah.
They have a second home in the country, and we'd stayed there with them multiple times. So there's definitely a closeness there. Um, so I really shrunk down to just talking to those 3 people, and I started pouring out a lot of what was going on in my life in my journal.
Mm,
I always had really great intentions of journaling. I had even, done it on and off some in college, and then motherhood hit. And, I blogged a little bit, which I kind of used as an online journal to
yeah.
record life with 3 boys. But that was the point that I actually started, I guess, when you're doing ministry and you have a relationship with God, it is very easy to kind of shift and
Mm,
and allow your faith to ride the spiritual
mhm.
coattails of your successful church, or the spiritual
Mhm.
coattails of your pastor husband. And I had worked hard not to do that, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just kind of fall into that rhythm.
Yeah.
So it was really a very raw time between God and I.
Mm,
Where I begged, I yelled, I screamed, and I wrote a lot of stuff down. I recorded every single day,
yeah.
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And it is honestly one of my most cherished possessions to
I
have
love that.
those journals now. I still do it every day, almost every day, probably 4 to 5 days a week, a journal. And sometimes it's as simple as writing down the things I'm grateful for, which was a
Mm,
huge way I kicked it off,
mm,
because I knew God was good,
mhm,
and I knew God was going to be good to me,
mm.
even though nothing around me felt good. So
Yeah.
I was like, I will start writing down things that I'm grateful for. And sometimes it was as simple as having ice cream with my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it did not have to be big, but I knew I had to recognize some good going on around me. So today, still, it's a lot of stream of conscious writing,
Mm,
dumping out the things in my life that I'm grateful for, and then moving on to my what my prayers are for myself and my kids and my business, and the ladies I get to work with in coaching, and the leading and loving it community, and the church I'm a part of. So I end up just pouring a lot of stream of conscious
yeah.
writing down, which was a practice that really helped save me
Yeah.
when I felt so lonely
Yeah.
during that
And
time.
this was a question I don't think I wrote down, so you're welcome to bypass this if you want. But you said, you knew God was good. Did you ever battle with anger towards God, and why did you allow this? Or was that something that you just couldn't allow? You had so much anger probably directed in other areas.
Yeah.
You couldn't direct it at God. You needed that to be a safe place.
Yeah, I'm kind of one of those people that anger is not an easy emotion for me to access with the people I'm
Okay.
close to.
Okay.
And that's something I've worked on in therapy, something I've worked on with a lot of my counseling.
Worked
Yes,
on to access it or not access it?
oh yeah, worked on it to access it because
To
I do feel
access
like
it.
it's an
Yes.
emotion that I don't want that left inside of me.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
worked on accessing it to get it out. I totally believe in the mind body connection, and that if we
Yeah.
don't get emotions out, they get stuck and the way they impact us, and like physiologically and neurologically what that does to us.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a believer of that kind of stuff. So I've had to definitely work on getting that anger out.
Mm,
Um, when it's those I'm closest to, I'm kind of like you. I get very frustrated when I have terrible service at a restaurant. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're just cooking chicken, you
I
know?
know, exactly.
But as far as that yelling, screaming, I'm not great at that. And um, for a number of reasons, but I will say I definitely had some very raw moments with God that did not make sense to me.
Mm,
I am the type of person who I can usually deal if I can figure out what happened.
okay.
Um, um,
Okay.
Life does not always work that way.
Yeah.
And even though you get answers to a lot of questions, you don't get answers to all the questions.
Mm,
So I think for me with God, it was more like, but I love him and I want to fix this. And
yeah. Yeah.
um, I've done this for 20 years, and I was with him since I was 19. So
Mm,
there
mm,
was a lot of fear that I poured out on God, and
mm.
a lot of, I don't feel like this is fair.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how is this fair? So and so's marriage fell apart and you restored it, and this marriage fell
Mhm.
apart and you restored it. And, how can you not do that for me and for us? That
Yeah.
just did not make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny that you say I interviewed my husband yesterday, and he'll be on the podcast on Monday. But one of the things that I had asked him about was, um how he was processing when I was walking through my darkest hours, and like where was he at in his relationship with the Lord. And one of the things he had said is he was like, I really struggled because in my mind I was like, I did everything right,
Mhm.
and Christian perspective is when you do everything right, then God blesses that and he makes things turn out right, and we were so young at the time. Now, after being in ministry for so many years, but it's still easy to fall into that trap. I don't know if you've
Sure.
heard of Kate Bauer. She wrote
Yes.
that book. Have you read her
Yes.
book?
Yep.
Oh my
I read
gosh.
it about a year ago. Yes.
Oh,
It's like, oh, what is the title of that? It's so good.
um, everything works out for a purpose or something, and other lies I believed. I don't know. But it's,
Yes, that's it.
how we all have a little bit of prosperity gospel in us. And we all think like when we just do all the right things, God's going to bless that and make it good. And then another thing that he really battled with, which I was thinking about with you, is like just blaming it. Like, what did I do? Like, how did I ruin this? How did I wreck this? And so how did you process that in therapy? Because I'm guessing that's where you process it, that this had nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Other people make their own choices.
Yeah, I have a very strong therapist
Mm,
who I think she saw the end of my marriage coming before I did.
isn't that funny?
So she started prepping me for that
Mm,
very early on. And I think, and I had a great childhood. great relationship with my parents. But we definitely pick up a lot of those patterns
Mm,
as kids that we
yeah.
carry into our adult life. The attachment, the way the relationship works, communication, all of that kind of stuff. And I think I had to really go back and examine probably who I thought God was, even as a child,
Mm,
and God, who I believe God to be for myself. I had to spend a lot of time reflecting on that. I had to spend a lot of time digging in. Um, I read a lot of books like Kate's
mm,
that, other people's experiences. I think probably the biggest lesson I've learned so many lessons. So every time I say the biggest lessons I'm learned, I'm like, but is it? I have like
yeah.
10 I could list as the biggest lesson. So one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that the greatest gift of going through intense suffering like that is you can take your suffering and allow it to be a survival guide for others.
Yeah.
And to be able to realize, like, I'm not at fault here. I read a lot
Mm,
of great books about personalities and the way people function to help me see some patterns and some weaknesses that I had been dealing with. So I did a lot of education,
yeah.
and I did a lot of digging in with God
Mm,
to ask him what is mine to own. In the midst of it, Nicole, because it was public, I had this prayer that I said every night when I laid my head down on my pillow.
mhm,
I asked myself, did I do anything today that I'll regret?
mm,
And I will not do anything that makes this harder for my kids.
yes.
Because my kids really went through massive loss. I talked to a therapist at the time who said, your kids have essentially gone through two divorces. They were in a situation where the entire church knew that my ex-husband had resigned before my kids had.
Wow.
I it was there's definitely not a handbook or a playbook that tells you exactly how to handle situations like that, but that was a huge part of my kids life.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
way they volunteered, my oldest was in youth group, the connections they had, the
Mm,
relationships, the people that they were around. We were the type of people who dug in and did ministry in life with the people that were on our staff and in our church. So it was a really massive loss for my kids. So I wanted to go to bed knowing that I had no regrets for
mm,
myself and I hadn't done anything to make it worse on my children.
mm.
um, and because of that constant accountability to self, it really helped me move forward in being able to recognize what was mine to own,
Mhm, mm,
and
mhm.
then what was mine to let go of.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna write that down. What was yours to own and what was yours to let go of? I love that. And I love how you said you had that personal accountability. I think sometimes God God allows us to, oh, this is such a trite statement, but God allows us to have these kids to bring us to keep us help us to keep perspective during the difficult times. I remember when my brother committed suicide 2 years ago, one of the things that really kept me going was, okay, I have 3 kids at the time. I was pregnant with my fourth. And like, yes, I need to mourn and I need to process, and I'm doing that in counseling. But at the same point, like, these kids are helping me stay rooted to the moment, stay grounded, and to remember what's most important, and
Mhm.
to not lose myself in the grief, to not lose myself in the pain. And that was going to be something that I was going to ask you about, was just how did you, I don't want to ask too much about your boys because that's their story, but how did you walk them through all of this, without, because gosh, man, I think I'm such a fighter. So for me, the tough thing would be not trying to like prove that like I wasn't at fault, that I was, oh, you know what I'm saying? And then to not try to alienate her. So how did you manage that with the boys?
Yeah. That was probably my biggest focus during that time. It was the balance of taking care of myself in order to take care of them.
Yep.
And it was not easy at
Mm,
all.
mm, mm.
um, I sought out great child therapist, for them to talk to, and always tried to be super honest when they had questions.
I was going
I
to
feel
ask
like
that.
when kids aren't given truth, they create their own truth,
Yep.
and they often blame themselves in their
Yep.
own truth.
Yep.
So they're the reason, they're at fault. I would always try to get them one on one after something had happened.
Mm,
Oftentimes that happens in a car, and
mhm.
that's great for boys because they are looking ahead and they're not
Yeah.
making eye contact. So some of our best conversations have been had in the car where I can say, "Hey, let's follow up with what you heard last night.
Yeah.
What questions do you have? Do you understand, what the statement means?" So just gave them a lot of room to be able to ask questions.
Mm, that's so good. Uh-oh. I think we froze here
Now
for a second. Oh, there we go.
and having a hard time. So it was difficult for them. They're still pretty, very, very, very protective of me.
Yeah.
Um, but I have a really open relationship with my boys now, in regards to things we discuss, questions they ask. I do remember having this moment with God. It felt so heavy
Mm,
parenting, being a single parent alone. um, Luckily, the way my parenting plan works out, they spend a large majority of the time with.
oh, we froze here. Ah, did I lose you, Brandy? Are you with me? Let's see. Little bit of
And
internet issue. Oh, there we are. There you are. We
okay,
froze just for a second. Okay, so go back. You said that they spend the majority of the time with you the way your parenting plan works out. And then what did you say from that point on?
yeah, so my kids spend a large deal of time with me the way my parenting plan has worked out, and it just really felt heavy. Walking your
Mm,
kids through trauma and tragedy
mm,
feels heavy. Feels
yeah.
really heavy too when in some ways it's attached to what their perception of God and what their perception of the
Yep.
church will be moving forward.
I mean,
So
can you imagine? I just want people to understand the weight of this because, yeah, it wasn't just, it's hard enough to watch your parents' marriage fall apart. But then when your, dad is attached to the religious system, and then to everything else that yeah, I mean, it's, whew, okay, that just hit me. So I want to make sure our listeners could enter into that heaviness. Keep going.
it, yeah, from being surrounded by thousands to like two people, it was my kids too.
Yeah. Goodness. We are just having all sorts of issues with this internet here. Let's see.
So I had this moment. I was reading in Judges about.
Okay. What is going on? Come on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, my internet is being whacked. Okay. Holy smokes. This happened yesterday with my husband, but it worked fine. So we're just going to keep rolling with it. Like my
Yeah.
internet is just being wackadoodle do. Okay. So you were
Okay.
reading in Judges.
Yeah.
We've got
I
it. We've been with you. So it was heavy, single parenting, walking your sons through this. You were reading in Judges. We're with you.
was reading in Judges when the Israelites were crossing the Jordan at flood stage, and that was the first time in their journey that the Ark of the Covenant was actually in front. Typically,
Mm,
the Ark of the Covenant was in the center of the camp. If they were moving that day, the Ark of the Covenant was in the center of the procession as it was moving. And this is the time that the Ark of the Covenant was brought to the front of the procession. And in fact, like God told Joshua to have it a mile ahead so that
mm,
everyone could see the Ark of the Covenant leading them. They could see God leading them. And I just had this moment. I'm reading this passage. The priest's feet, they hit the water. And as soon as their feet hit the water, the river dries up and it piles up in a big old pile,
mm.
which in my head kind of looks like my laundry
Yeah.
situation, but it was way bigger than that.
Yeah.
But water, it piled up river, and the riverbed was dry. And the
Mm.
priest carried the Ark of the Covenant to the middle of the river, and they stood there. And all hundreds of thousands of Israelites passed by them. And it was in that moment that I felt God say to me, you know what, Brandy, you are acting like your job is to hold back the water,
Wow.
and your job is to
Wow.
carry the Ark of the Covenant, and your
Mm,
job is to be the Israelite who walks across the water and gets to the other side. When your job is actually to hold me for
wow.
your kids, to hold my legacy, to hold my kingdom. Your job is to stand on solid ground, to
Mm,
stand on that
mm,
dry riverbed, that dry foundation, and hold who I am in their lives. I'm the one who's going to hold back the water. I'm
that's
the one
powerful.
who's going to deliver your boys to the promises in their lives.
Wow.
I'm the one who's going to walk them and lead them across dry land to the other side. And it was really in that moment, I felt God impress on me like, you might be a single parent, but you are not parenting alone.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it has it has been at that moment where I started praying, like, God, this is also part of my kids' story, and
Mm,
you're the one who can take their suffering,
mm,
and
mm.
change their lives. And I don't want to take away from them by trying trauma and their tragedy.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. I mean, you said so many things. My brain's like, poof. And I know this is going to be such a blessing to so many people, just your willingness to share like that God moment that you had. But yeah, I think as parents, sometimes we think we've got to protect our kids, and we forget. I remember one of my friends, had shared with me, God asks them to walk through things as well, like, and we cannot shield them from what God is asking them to walk through. And he has a purpose and a plan for it. And then I love too that you shared like the best thing that you could do for your boys was to make sure that you were healthy and walking with Jesus yourself. Because yeah, you're exactly right. Our kids fear for us. They get worried for us. And then when we're not taking care of ourselves and we're not having honest conversations, you're exactly right. They come up with reasons as to why things fell apart or why things didn't work out. And so just the wisdom that you are sharing and your, ability and courage to be vulnerable, I know is going to bless so many people, Brandy. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. But
Yeah. I had
um
a therapist friend, Dr. Charity Byers, who's with Blessing Ranch down in Florida as well. She said to me, I was talking to her one day, just a catch up session, and I said, what do I do if my kids don't love the church? Like,
mm,
what can I do? What's the best thing? And she said, the best way for your kids to learn to love the church is for them to see you love the church.
mm,
And I was
mm.
like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah, yeah.
We forget how we walk through tragedy and hurt and pain. That's what our kids learn from. That's what
Yeah.
they take away and move forward with. So I was so happy that she gave me those words of wisdom, because I'm like, oh, well, I of course I still love the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. We forget like kids are just, adults shrunken down, right? And
Yeah,
yes, they've got so much growth to do, but they're processing things many times the exact same ways we are. We try to overcomplicate it for them, but I think just like yes, living loud in front of them, and just modeling our relationship with Jesus and not hiding like, yeah, this sucks. Yeah, this is hard. Yeah, I wish this was different, but this is what God's asked us to walk through, and I'm believing he's going to give us what we need. And so that's incredible. I want to talk a little bit about where you are now because, yeah, we can kind of stay in the blown up, like despair of it all. But I want us to move into because you're thriving now.
I
Um,
am. Yes.
yes, you are thriving now. And I've just been, like I said, like I've been invested in you for so many years and just watching and I remember like when all of this hit, just like, okay, what's gonna happen to Brandy? What is she gonna do? And then just watching, I think there was this period of time where you were very, very silent. And then I remember you started emerging from that silence. I think you just need that, time to grieve and to work
Yeah.
through all of that. But seeing you come out and just start to share some of your story, I think you've um been so, I mean, my opinion means nothing, but so wise in how you've like waited to tell a lot of this story. I think that was so good. Um but here you are and you've started this coaching business and you're still with leading and loving it and you're doing some incredible things. So did you, in order to be able to embrace all that God has for you now, did you really have to make sure you grieved and kind of put all that was to bed behind you? Or is it one of those things where there's still that grief there, there's still that sadness, but that's what makes this new season so incredible? What have you done with the grief, and how has it kind of propelled you into this new season?
Yeah. I have several thoughts about that answer. I think one of the
Give them
things
to us.
one of the things I realized in the middle of it, so funny you say I was quiet. One of the things that made me, you asked about anger earlier. One of the things that made me most angry was there was a blog post written. There were lots of blog posts written, but
Oh,
there
I
was
can't
one
imagine.
that addressed me, and it basically said, like, where in the world is Brandy Wilson? And I was so angry
Oh, I
at
can't
that.
imagine.
And the point they were making is like, I understand the point they were making. It wasn't written to be that way, but I'm like, man, you know what Brandy Wilson's doing? She's taking care of herself. You know
Yeah.
what Brandy Wilson's doing? She's making sure that her kids are surviving. You know
Yeah.
what Brandy Wilson's doing? She's creating so I got like
Come on,
so
girl.
worked up that I guess someone felt like I owed an answer
No.
when I knew I didn't.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I realized in the course of all of that hurt is that for me, the way I'm wired and what I was experiencing. Now, I think different trauma and tragedy people walk through, they can share in the midst of it.
Mm.
What I was walking through, not knowing a lot, I felt like God, one, really protected my voice, uh,
Mm.
because a lot of things were poured out in the journals. A lot of things were even maybe said to my therapist that if I would have taken that further, I would have had to do a lot of apologizing for.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
was in a
wise.
situation where I was trying to search for truth.
Mm.
So I tried to, God was gracious. He protected my voice.
Yeah.
I also knew that I wanted to speak out of my scars and not my wounds,
Mm.
which,
Yes.
that kind of goes hand in hand. I've gone through different situations that in the middle of it, I can share with people how that feels. This was one where I couldn't. I
Yeah.
wanted, and it's because of my kids.
Yeah.
It's because I wanted to be healthy, and it's because I knew what was going on was very easily Googled.
Yep. Yep.
And I wanted to protect my kids and what they were hearing. I
Yeah.
also knew that I wasn't the only one going through this situation. So
Yeah.
therefore, what I was learning rather than the rawness of being in the middle of it.
Mm.
So chose to speak out of my scars and not my wounds. And then I was really gifted with an amazing support system.
Mm.
Um, Lori, who I've mentioned, my friend Paige, I've mentioned, my therapist, Lisa Hughes, who's your neighbor down in Florida.
Yes.
Those were the people I talked to pretty regularly. And I think the biggest, I would have never realized this pre going through something that traumatic, but one of the biggest gifts my support system gave me is they allowed me and to spend the time I needed grieving. And I think
Mm.
so often when we're the support system,
Mhm.
because we love that person
Yep.
so much, we want to point out what we see going on in their
Yep.
life.
Yep.
We want to say, this is what you should do.
Yeah.
We want to help them get through that and move forward. So in loving them well, sometimes we don't give them enough time.
Yeah.
And I had this support system that realized that in order for me to heal, there were certain things that I just had to recognize on my own.
Mm.
Now, once I recognized them and they saw them as truth as well, they affirmed it, but they
Yeah.
never pushed me before I was ready.
Mm.
And then they gave me that time to grieve
Yeah.
before, and they were ready to move on with me whenever that was over.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember having a bad day, probably, I don't know, about a year and a half after my divorce. And um, Lisa and Lori were actually together for something. And it was one of those days where, something happens and you're like, I woke up and it was a good day. And now I'm just back in bed. And
Yeah.
I debated calling them. I knew they were together. I texted them, and of course my phone rings, and it was just this really great conversation. And I remember both of them saying, like, stay in bed. Your kids aren't going to be home for a few hours. Guess what?
Mm,
It's okay. Stay in bed.
mm,
We're going to call and check on you later,
yeah,
but you're going to be okay.
yeah,
Um, so they allowed me to not be okay when
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't, and then they were just as ready for me to be okay when I was. So my support system was amazing.
That's so good. And it's such a good word for me too, because yes, I have friends walking through things, and my counselor always says I'm a compassionate warrior, where I want to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And you're exactly right. Sometimes like it comes from a really good place, but we want to push people through their grief faster than they, are able to actually process it, and just allowing people and getting comfortable in the mess and the uncomfortableness of it, and just allowing them to have their time there so that they can emerge from it, and just because someone has emerged from the majority of their grief, you're exactly right, doesn't mean that there's not going to be times where it's going to hit them all over again. Major trauma does that. And
Right.
so not getting a fearful of, oh my gosh, are they going backwards? No, this is normal, like there's going to be pockets of times where they're struggling again. No big deal. Like, let's be there. I love that word. So tell us about this new journey you're on and the new things that you are involved with now.
Yeah, so I'm still with Leading and Loving It, and love that part of my life. Getting to work with my closest friend is really amazing. I know for some people that wouldn't be a good fit. For us, it's a great fit. I think
You guys are
one,
so fun to watch together too. I love it.
we
It's so fun.
we really have the best time together. So
Yeah.
I would have never thought that I could have a cross country friendship that is as close as it is. But,
Yeah.
that's one thing with technology today. Technology gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons, and rightfully so. It also provides us a lot of connection
Yeah.
and authentic connection
Yeah.
that we would not be able to have otherwise. Probably my favorite thing about Leading and Loving It and where I am now is that, Lori and I kind of created, she had started Leading and Loving It. Because she was at a large staff and wanted to have contact with the staff wives and the women on staff, and started to see pretty quickly that it was reaching these women outside of her church community. So I remember connecting with her, gosh, it's probably been 12 years ago now,
Mm.
and just sending a DM on Twitter. I
Yeah.
don't think we had Instagram yet, and sending her a DM and saying, like, hey, there's a situation going on at our church I knew I kind of needed to speak into, and just saying, could I ask you some questions about this? And she was like,
Yeah.
sure. So we hopped on the phone and talked the first day for like an hour and a half, and just had this immediate connection. And she's definitely a dreamer and an entrepreneur, and loves starting things. And we went out to visit not long after that. And I remember her saying to me, like, I think this Leading and Loving It thing could actually grow. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what it looks like, but I think it could make an impact. Do you want to help me do it? Like, absolutely. So she and I, along with a really great team, ended up kind of creating this virtual ministry that I like to call a mom and mom, not a mom and pop. It's a mom and mom.
Yeah.
Started out small, of us just hopefully offering the connection and the friendship
Mm.
and the impact that we had had with one another to a larger community of women leaders.
Yeah.
So now we exist to empower and equip women to love their life in ministry.
I love it.
And one of the best parts of it was that I became a product of
Mm.
the ministry I had helped create.
Yeah.
I became, because I loved ministry. I wasn't one of those ladies who didn't love it. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah.
Loved being part of a church, all of that kind of stuff. Loved senior leadership. Um, but I became one of those people who, Leading and Loving It, came beside during a dark time. They cheered on, they encouraged, they provided with community, they covered in prayer, and was allowed to be a product of that organization, which is a huge gift
I
to
love
me.
it. Yeah.
Um, so yes, Leading and Loving is still a huge part of my life. I also have a what I like to call my single mom side hustle, where I work as a life coach. I've been doing training with Valerie Burton at the CAP Institute, so it's coaching and positive psychology, and I get to work with a lot of people going through major life
Mm.
transition. I
Mm.
think lots of times going through major life transition, I know for me, I felt stuck.
Mm,
Like there, as I said earlier, are so many questions and no answer.
yeah.
So what do do next? What is my best next step? So
Yes.
I get to work with women. Lots of them are going through divorce, empty nesters. Some have had just major career changes. Some have
Mm,
gone from being, working full time to now they're a working full time mom. How do
yeah.
they juggle that? So I do work with a lot of single moms and have a single moms group that I meet with on a regular basis that I love. So I do group counseling, individual counseling, um, not counseling, coaching,
Good.
group coaching, individual coaching with lots of women. And it's just my opportunity to help them get unstuck, to help them
Yeah.
find their next best step for themselves. And it's been a joy to do it. It is definitely one of those things where I can take my suffering and turn it into a
Mm,
survival guide. And, I had heard for years and years and years that nothing was wasted. God
mm,
didn't waste anything. And I understood that when it came to all the good things. I don't think I fully understood that when it came to pain and hurt
mm,
and suffering.
mm.
And now I do. And
Yeah.
I really and truly am honored that, um, God gave me the opportunity to be able to help other people as they're moving through that grief and that trauma, and life looks different and they're looking for answers. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that passage in scripture where Paul talks about like God comforts us so that we can comfort others, and
I love that passage.
I do too. And I always knew that passage and I didn't experience the depth of it until, as I mentioned in 2019, we lost my brother committed suicide January 4th. And then the day after my last son was born, my husband's mom at age 72 passed away from Alzheimer's. And yeah, two deaths in 1 year. That's why everyone was like, 2020 was so hard. I was like, 2020 was a breeze.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, um,
Perspective,
so
Nicole, perspective.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So, but I remember thinking of that point, like what would happen if I ever lost someone? You always think of like worst case scenario and what would this feel like? How would I react with Jesus? How would I react with my family? And then after losing two people that I was incredibly close to in the same year, within just a couple of months of each other, you really realize that like Jesus, and it's hard to explain. I don't know if you how it was for you, but I remember I always felt there was a closeness. Like I always felt like Jesus was close. In the moment, I don't know that I could have expressed it because you're just feeling the grief so deeply. But I
Mhm.
knew he was present. I knew he was with me. Now looking back, I'm like, holy crap. He was with me every second. His
Yeah.
peace, his comfort was there. It's in the moment you're aware of it, but then when you look back, you're like, he was completely enveloping that situation,
Right.
And
Right.
that's what I tell people is like in the moment you may not sense it, one foot in front of the other. Because when you look back and Jesus says, now it's time to share your story, you will be able to tell someone how he just completely covered you in that moment and
Right.
sustained you.
Yep. For
So
sure. For sure.
I
Well,
love it. Well, Brandy, is there anything else? I know I had sent the questions ahead of time, and sometimes God puts things on our hearts. Is there anything else you want to share? Or, I mean,
um,
you have poured out so much, so I can't imagine there'd be anything left. But just in case, it was so
no,
good.
yeah, no, I think you did a great job of covering it. I'd love to connect with people. Love Brandi Wilson on Instagram. And yeah, love brandywilson.com
That's what
online.
I was about to ask if there you have a website. So yeah, check her out. Love Brandi Wilson on Instagram, lovebrandywilson.com. If you follow me on Instagram, I follow her. So you can just scroll through my followers and I'll hook your website up to this podcast as well so they can see it and follow it. And then if you are in ministry and in leadership and you are a lady, it's ladies only. Sorry, dudes, but Leading and Loving It is phenomenal. You can follow Leading Loving It on Instagram and leadinglovingit.com. But anyways, Brandi, thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate it. This has been awesome. I feel so
Thank
filled up.
you. So
So
good.
thank you for your honesty and everything. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you.